Again, apologies, got the full bio here. But again, welcome Dr. Stephen Haberlin. He's going to discuss his path and work with using Tonglen as a practice of teaching with educators and promotion of inclusion and compassion. Dr. Haberlin is an assistant professor of education at Wesleyan College in Macon. After working as a K-12 educator, bless you, Dr. Haberlin, on that one, mainly as a teacher of elementary and gifted education, Steve earned his PhD in elementary education from the University of South Florida. His teaching, research, and service are focused on integration of contemplative practices, including mindfulness and meditation, and with the preparation of teachers. His campus works includes establishing a meditation space for students and faculty, facilitating meditation workshops, hosting contemplative campus-wide convocation, and his research and writings have appeared in a number of academic journals. He is currently co-writing a book chapter on the use of Tonglen to promote inclusion and compassion, instructional supervision of teachers, and contracted with Roman and Littlefield to publish a book on mindfulness-based approach to coaching and preparing teachers. Again, as a meditator for 25 years, Stephen continues to study and refine his own contemplative practice, including recently graduating from a 2-year contemplative studies Tibetan Buddhism program facilitated by Dr. Miles Neal. So without further ado, Dr. Haberlin, thank you so much for your time and your presence here, and we're so looking forward to having you share with us your experiences. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. I appreciate the intro, and thank you to everybody. And Sensei Ellison, I really appreciate being able to share and talk and collaborate. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody, I think you can see the PowerPoint now. So just real quick about Wesleyan. Wesleyan's is a private women's college in Macon, Georgia. It was the first to be able to charter degrees to women, the first in the world. So it's a really, if you ever get a chance, it's a really beautiful campus. And if you'd like to ever come on by and have some coffee with me or stop by. So getting a little bit into my background, changing here. My first exposure to meditation was, I was about 12 years old, and I was taking martial arts classes. I was taking, I think, like Shaolin Kung Fu / karate. And the instructor would say, before class, he would say, sit down and crush, in a cross-legged position and try to concentrate, just try to block everything. That was the instructions, was just, try to focus, try to concentrate. And I always remember the pounding of the wall next to me, because this was back in the 80s, and aerobics, if you remember, aerobics was really big, and they would be blasting. There was an aerobics studio next door, and they would be blasting the music, and it would be literally shaking the wall. And I'd be sitting there thinking, what am I supposed to do? What is this? So that was my first exposure to meditation, but I think it piqued my curiosity, because in my teens, I stayed in the martial arts, and I would read about Zen. I read about Zen Buddhism and how the samurai used it as a kind of a mental framework, to try to deal with the violence in their life and try to harness their mental abilities. So I was always fascinated with meditation, but it wasn't until about my early 20s that I actually learned formal meditation, where I actually went and studied how to do it. So I don't know if you're familiar with TM, which stands for Transcendental Meditation. You probably heard of it. It really exploded in, I believe, the 60s when the Beatles embraced it with the Maharishi. So this is Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He was the creator of Transcendental Meditation. He was the one that came over in the 60s to the United States and really spread it. If you're not familiar with the technique, it is a little bit different from like a Zazen or just a breath meditation. They're actually using a mantra, and they're using a sound that they'll provide to you. And then you practice the sound in a very nuanced way. And then that essentially is to settle the mind. And through the technique, it's using kind of the natural charm of the mind. The mind is like, you're almost turning itself inward, and you're following the thoughts in reverse, and then coming down and into this place of kind of pure consciousness. And you do it twice a day, 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes in the morning before breakfast, and then 15, 20 minutes before dinner. So twice a day. And so I learned that it was a 4-day course. You go 4 days in a row. And I really had a lot of benefits. I felt like the stress, one of the reasons I went and learned formally, because I felt like as an adult, as a young adult, there was all these pressures of, you got to get married and society's saying you got to get a house and you got to have a good job. And I think that was like weighing heavily on me. So I learned this technique. I'd say right away, I started to feel more relaxed, more calm, more centered, better, relationships seemed to get better. I felt a little more creative. So a lot of the things that they cite in the literature and a lot of the research, there's been a lot of research done on TM all the way back since Maharishi came to the country. But a lot of the findings in the research I found true. They seem to be my experience. So I've done that the last, about 25 years or so, 24 years. But what happened was during that time, I don't know how long you've been meditating, but it wasn't really meditation and mindfulness. These were not really buzzwords in the 80s. And it was really kind of seen as a weird thing, or what, it's a strange thing that you're meditating. So I kind of described myself as like a closeted meditator at the time, that I learned in my 20s and probably into my 30s. I didn't share that I meditated. But essentially what I would say is I'm going to take a nap. I don't know if you guys have ever felt like the family didn't understand, your friends didn't understand, or people you work with. So I'd be like, God, what were you doing? I was off, just taking a nap, but I was really doing TM, or maybe napping. But so just not feeling open to share it. I didn't feel like the time was right or comfortable with it. So for better or worse, that's kind of how I approached it. But what really was interesting is I became an elementary teacher, kind of a second career change. And so now we're talking probably in the 90s to 2000, and mindfulness started to become more of a buzzword. And they started to do things like mindfulness in yoga in classrooms, in public classrooms, and experiment with that more. That really caught my attention, because as a teacher, I was thinking, wow, wait a minute, I can combine things that I'm passionate about or that I find really helpful, like meditation. I can teach my kids that, I can teach my students that. So that just grabbed me. I really wanted to run with that. So as this mindfulness trend really started increasing, I worked with a colleague, and we think it's the first research or study with gifted elementary students. But what we basically did is for 10 weeks, we taught the students a different mindfulness technique each week. Then we sat down and we observed them, but we sat down, we interviewed them, and we asked them about their experiences, and we collected some survey data. And so, for example, we would teach them one week just the breath meditation on a Friday. And then the next Friday, we taught them mindful walking out in the school courtyard. We taught them yoga. We had a yoga instructor come in and teach them yoga. We did mindful eating. And that the title there is, I'll never forget, there was one child, he was very rambunctious. He had ADHD, and he was all over the place. And we did mindful eating, and we used a marshmallow. And I remember he described in the interview as the marshmallow being like 1,000. When he slowed down and became more aware of eating it, it was like 1,000 marshmallows in his mouth. That's how he described such an intense experience. And I never forgot that, because it really helped him. It really slowed him down. He was able to be calmer in the classroom and more focused. And overall, out of the 28 students, most of them experienced some sense of calm. They said they felt a little more creative, a little more focused. So we had really good results. The paper was eventually published. But that kind of led me, I guess, on the journey of trying to integrate mindfulness and contemplative studies into education system, or into the classroom. So the next, I guess, phase was when I got in at USF, when I was completing my dissertation for my doctorate. I was very interested, again, still in mindfulness, and also Zen Buddhism and Buddhism in general, about could we phase some of this in, could some of these concepts or practices help when we were preparing teachers. So I was supervising about 11 elementary student teachers. I was supervising them. Supervising is pretty challenging. I'm coaching them. I'm watching them teach, give them feedback and things like that. So my dissertation involved taking some mindfulness concept as a supervisor. So what that looked like was when I sat down to conference with them, maybe to talk about their lesson plan and what they were going to teach, I might do a short breath meditation before I sat with them. I might use mindful listening and try to be aware of how much I interrupted and things like that. So I started to try to embed these concepts into what we were doing as supervisors, kind of this cycle of supervision. And again, I found it had promising results. It seemed to help me as a supervisor connect better. I felt like I was able to pick up more on even the emotional needs of some of the student teachers. I could kind of read in their face when they were going to break down, when the tears were coming, and I just felt more in tune with them. So I pushed that a little bit in the field of supervision. I presented at a couple supervision conferences and published a paper saying that preparing teachers, we have a lot of good paradigms and models, but we're way behind the curve as far as including mindfulness and Eastern practices or contemplative practices into supervision. We haven't really expanded that lens. And so it's been received fairly well. I mean, one of the papers was published in the top supervision journal, but I'm not sure it's entirely embraced, to be honest, at this point, by some of the people that have been in teaching education or supervision for some time. I think they're steeped in their traditional approaches. But so I've been trying to push that paradigm and open it up a little bit. So the next part was, after graduating and coming to Wesleyan and working in higher ed, I wanted to continue to say, well, how can I put these contemplative practices into the classroom? And just to kind of give you some context of, I don't know how familiar you are with college students or working with them, but they're suffering from some of the highest anxiety rates and some of the highest depression rates of young people of their generation, of any time period in the United States. And then this has been exacerbated. What the early research is showing is this has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So now you have feelings of isolation where students have been on campus or they're learning virtually and they can't go to a lot of social events and things like that on campus. So even our own students at Wesleyan, they really, as one professor said, they're very brittle. They're very fragile emotionally and mentally. So I think any kind of tool that we can give them, anything we can bring in that can help them with exploring how their mind's working, helping them kind of buffer the stress response, be able to focus in class a little better, really is worth the effort. So one of the things I really thought about was, when they come into your class, if they're frazzled, if they're anxious, if they're not feeling, if they're thinking about a million things they have to do, or they just broke up with their boyfriend or something like that, when they're coming into your class, they're not there. The space, the headspace is not there for them to do learning. So we've got to have some entry point, some segue to kind of prepare them and say, okay, we're shifting gears now mentally and let's be in the right headspace for learning. So one of the things, let me see if it's the next, let me stay on this slide. So one of the things, I'll get back to this with some research I've done, but what I'll do is start with, if you can see this, there's a Tibetan singing bowl, and I'll just, at the start of class, I'll ask them to kind of sit upright in a comfortable position, and I'll ring the bell and just start to have them listen, like a sound listening meditation, just to listen. And then I'll instruct them a little bit on just following the breath. Very simple, and we'll just do it, a couple of minutes, but I do it every class. I do it every class, and I do it before every single class. And that's just a way to try to create kind of a more peaceful landscape. I tell them, let's settle the mind, let's calm the mind, kind of create a sense of community. And that's been spreading. I've trained some other faculty here, and they're using it in a first year student program here. They're using mindfulness, some kind of way of starting the class. So I think it's kind of gradually seeping into the culture of the campus of starting class with some kind of calming transition. I'm going to circle back to that in a minute. So part of extending out of contemplative practice at the campus is the provost, the dean, had asked me, if I get you a space, would you do something with it for mindfulness? Like, our students need a quiet place, right, to go and chill out And I said, you give me the space and I'll make it work. And so it's a modest space. They found a very small space up in the third floor of the student service building. And so I set it up as kind of just a chill, we call it a chill place, or a place where they can go, and students can go during the school day. They can go individually and sit there. There's some apps up on the wall where they can do guided meditations, or they've learned from me, or like in workshops, and they can go there and practice and just have some quiet time. Faculty, there's some staff that use it. If I do a facilitated small enough workshop or session, we also use that space. And I started teaching a class. This was what Sensei Elston was talking about, where he came and Zoomed and was a guest speaker. He led us through. This is a new class, Mindfulness and Learning, which was approved last year, but it just started this fall. And so I'm teaching mindfulness, this quality, the psychological quality of mindfulness, but within the context of learning, things like focus and concentration, the working memory, the executive function. So all within learning and how mindfulness might help us learn better. But the theme of the course is also stress and distraction, how mindfulness might help them buffer against all of the technological distractions, the social media, and the rising levels of stress and anxiety. So this course, just to flip back, this course I'm holding on Thursdays. What I do is I'll bring the class is small enough, it's like 11 students. We'll have what we call on Thursday a med lab, a meditation lab. So all of the theories and all of the readings and things they're doing on a Thursday, we'll spend the whole class in the meditation space, just doing like a first-person inquiry or a first-person experience of the meditation concepts they're learning. So for example, if they're learning about the 4 applications or foundations of mindfulness, on a Tuesday, we'll kind of talk about it from a theoretical point. But then on a Thursday, the entire session would be in the meditation space, just exploring those 4 foundations, just actually doing the practice, discussing it in discussion, sharing our experiences. That model, though, I have to give credit. I got it from Brown University, had been doing that for years, where they have a meditation lab and they try to bridge the theory to practice that way. So I'm going to circle back to the meditation at the start of the class. I have a paper that's close to being published. I call it micro meditations, because here's one of the biggest challenges that you'll face for professors and even K-12 teachers is they're going to say, we don't have time. We don't have time to dedicate, right, to meditation or to do mindfulness stuff in class. And, it's kind of like exercise. You don't have time to exercise. But if you look at it, it's an investment of time, right? I tell them if you spend even 3 minutes, maybe 5 at the beginning of your class, if the rest of the class, the students are focused and they're in a better frame of mind, then that, few minutes was an investment of your time. You were laying down the pipework, the proper foundation. So I collected some data from last school year. So I looked at 61 undergrads and graduate students doing this brief meditation in my classes. And you can see 95%, or about 58 of them, said it helped, it worked, it produced a state of calmness and stress reduction. A majority also felt like it helped them serve as like a mental reset before they started learning. About half felt it kind of brought them together as a learning environment, a learning community. They felt closer. And it's a very small percent had some difficulty. They were like, it doesn't work, or I can't meditate. And that could be a combination of, I think, maybe just needing to have better instructions on how to meditate, spending a little more time on direction, or, there's some people that just, I don't proclaim meditation is for everybody. I think it benefits everybody, but there's, for whatever reason, some people just don't take to it. So that was just the results of looking at that. And I want to keep pushing further with that and trying to expand that out and see, just collecting some more data on meditating at the start of classes. So I'm going to shift into Tonglen and where that came from and how I'm trying to work that into teacher education. So I learned Tonglen when I took the training with Dr. Miles Neal. Miles Neal is a Buddhist psychotherapist. He deals with Tibetan Buddhism and then tries to embed that into psychotherapy and psychology. And if you're not familiar with Tonglen, I'll just give you kind of a quick description, but maybe you are, I don't know. Tonglen is really about, it's kind of like radical use of radical imagination. You are imagining taking in the suffering of others and then sending out relief in some form. So there are various ways that it's taught and practiced. So there's not just one way that it's unpacked. But basically, when you're sitting there in meditation, when on the in-breath, you would visualize kind of like a white or a light coming in. Oh, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. You would visualize a dark smoke, like a thick, heavy smoke coming in, and that would represent the suffering of others or another. And you're bringing that into the heart area and kind of opening the heart. And then from there, you're sending out in a white, kind of uplifting openness. You're sending out relief, support, or maybe compassion, whatever that person or that group of people need. So like an example would be, I had some neighbors, the family lost the husband to COVID, and he was a 50-year-old healthy guy. So I'm sitting in meditation, I might visualize the family and the feeling of loss that they have and the stress, right? And just that heaviness. And I might imagine it taking it in from them. I'm bringing in a dark, heavy smoke. I'm bringing it in, that pain, that suffering in through the nostril, and then visualizing it coming down into the heart area. From there, it's transforming, because most people say, well, that's not, you're taking in the negative, but you're recycling it or transforming it into a positive energy. And then that could be support, relief, helping the family find closure, right? Helping them, just giving out love. And I would send that out through my imagination out to the family, and they would kind of breathe that in and take that in. And then the instructions generally are to try to expand that out to others. So maybe you can think of other people, and it's not hard to find, but other people who have suffered the loss, right, of a loved one, or lost a family member or a parent. And you would basically try to take it in of a group of people, right? Or eventually everyone, and then sending it out. So you're going like micro to macro, if that makes sense. So that's generally the idea of it. What you're doing, if you think about Tonglen, and once you practice, you're training yourself to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. So what you naturally would push away or avert or avoid, which is what? Uncomfortable, suffering and negativity of others, you're actually training yourself to have an open space and to be okay with that, to sit with that, and then to be able to provide support mentally and visually with them. So trying to bridge this over to instructional supervision or preparing teachers, I thought, well, one of our biggest challenges is in teacher ed is just trying to have an inclusive framework, meaning like, during these times of racial injustice and social injustice, and trying to be inclusive when we're preparing teachers, and have those teachers also have an inclusive, compassionate mindset to their children, to their students. I thought Tonglen is something that we should explore. I mean, it's a tool that, here's a practical example. If a principal is running a school, and that principal can have a tool to take in all of that suffering, all that negativity of the students, maybe even of the teachers, and then be able to expand their compassion, expand their sense of love and compassion, then that could help their mindset and possibly help them as they run that school, as they work with the teachers and students. So from a practical standpoint, it would be trying to get them to connect to, maybe they are not in a position where they suffered from, say, racial injustice or discrimination, or have explored their bias, for example, but through Tonglen, maybe they can open up that space, and try to understand others a bit more, and be more tolerant, or be more accepting, or maybe want to take action on injustice. So just providing kind of a mental tool. So we've got a colleague of mine, he's up at University of Maine. We have a book chapter that's coming out in a supervision book for next year. So this is highly theoretical at this point. It's just more of a concept, but we're going to follow up and hopefully be able to do some actual data collection with some principals, with some teachers, maybe student teachers, and see if they practice Tonglen, how might it color or shade their experience, right, in the field. So I'm looking at the time here. I'm talking a lot. So what I'd like to do is stop talking. I'd love to just, maybe field some questions on the work. And, maybe we can get a brief discussion going on, maybe some things between education and meditation, or if you have some questions that relate from your practice. Just like to open that up.
And Stephen, stop sharing for me, and then I can open the screen up for you.
Okay, did that. Yeah, just jump right in, please.
Hi, Shikaku Paul Baker. Thank you very much for the talk. I'm a social scientist, so of course I took, and in fact, I'm a design methodologist. So I was taking notes on your methodology, which probably might not be a good thing. I was particularly interested in a couple things, one of which is how you accounted for interference or compounding effect when you were looking at that first study with, if you taught them a different technique each week, you're confounding the preceding effect.
Right.
I mean, you can say broadly, it's kind of like saying exercise is good for you,
right.
But if exercise means a marathon one day and weightlifting the next, these are radically different. So just a question.
Yeah.
The other one was the pilot study, which is also, both of these are fascinating studies. But as a methodologist, I would strongly encourage perhaps the use of controls, because without controls, you don't know to what to attribute the effect.
Yes. Yeah.
So when one has a tool without controls, you really can't say that tool has that effect, because there's a self-selection confirmation bias going into it. It may be that the people who signed up were already. So while I personally think these are very valuable tools, dealing with the uninformed and naive, the first pushback they're going to say is there were no controls. So
well, yeah, I think
I'm a political scientist. So
yeah.
In my social science field, we don't publish without controls. So I'm quite seriously interested in how your discipline addresses that.
Well, there's a couple of things. It's not, well, the first study, I think I agree with you on the first study. We did a mixed method, so we had qualitative and quantitative data. Looking back at it now, right? It's easy to Monday morning quarterback. I think we probably did need to have a control group. Or the other thing is what you said is, I think maybe just sticking with one mindfulness technique and running it over the 10 weeks and then seeing what happens, and then going and maybe doing it again. I think that probably would have, if I would have a do-over, I think we were overzealous and excited and said, what happens if we try this it sounds great to have variety, but I think that's probably what I did in the first. On this second one, it's not a quantitative study. I don't, what I was looking at is in the research, in the literature, there's enough data to say with higher ed students that there's going to be some benefit. There's been a lot of research in that line. What there's not a lot of is from I'm not my specialty coming out of USF is qualitative research, is looking at the experience, firsthand experience of others, kind of phenomenon. So that's what I stay within that path. So this second study, this pilot study starting with brief meditation, I was very interested in their perspectives, because we have data on saying it might help them, not necessarily in the classroom, but in general, it might help them, say, with anxiety or stress. But we've never asked the students their experience. We never tried to get in their head and say, well, how do you perceive it? How do you perceive it, meditation, or how do you perceive it affects the learning community? So it's just a different design study. What you're saying is not wrong. What we could do is we could take a class that does the meditation and take a class that doesn't do it, and then try to have a control group that way. That might be something I might consider. We have like $1 million. There's a team of researchers here. We've applied for $1 million grant. Part of that is going to have some control groups, and it's more quantitative heavy, working with some other people. But this one here, that's not really that's just not what I was going for. I was going for what is their perception, what is their beliefs about it, practicing class. So I can't make we don't try to make any generalizations. I can't go across and say, yeah, this is going to work in every classroom at Wesleyan, right? I can't say this is going to work across higher ed, because the nature of the study wouldn't allow me to generalize like that, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? Is that okay? Yeah.
Uh,
I appreciate you.
If you'd like to chat offline, because I don't
Yeah.
want to hijack this.
Okay.
As I said, I am a methodologist and I have
Yeah.
observations, but I think what you're doing is very valuable work. So
Okay.
thank you.
I appreciate the feedback.
If it's for folks either in the room or online, let Kosetsu, since he's our first questioner, like he's been taking notes and to see if he'd like to ask questions or comments on that.
Certainly. So is this on?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, great. So Steve, thank you very much for your work. I think that's extremely valuable. As Hojo mentioned, I've served as a chaplain at North Carolina State University working with college students. With my youngest son in elementary school years ago, I found this lovely little book, Sitting Still Like a Frog. I don't know if you know that one.
I've heard of it, yes.
Right. So I'm very interested in introducing various techniques. And I guess my first question is, having worked with both age groups, where do you feel like the need is most critical, or maybe the other way to say it is most impactful with the younger children or with the young adults? My son started meditating because, monkey see, monkey do. He saw me doing it and he started sitting.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic that he's sitting with you so young. I have two thoughts on that. The Dalai Lama once said, there's a quote that I actually put in my emails. It's something to the effect of, if all students learned to meditate at 8 years old, then in one generation we would stop all the wars and violence in the world. And whether that's true or not, I think the idea of starting students as young as possible makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I would support that with is just the concept of neuroplasticity. And, similar to a student learning, a child being able to learn multiple languages, much easier, right, when they're young. And as you get older, the brain still is soft-wired, I believe, from the research, but it's a little more hardwired, if that makes sense. It's a little harder. So even by college, I think they've created neural pathways or networks that support anxiety and reacting with the stress response. So it's not like we can't undo those things and teach them tools to manage the stress of today. But I think it's a whole lot easier. It makes a whole lot more sense if we could embed it across schools as early as primary grades, and start like your child, and just start having them even sit for a few minutes or a minute, and just quiet time is what some schools are doing. It just makes a lot more sense to start them there. That's when the potential is there for them to run with it and kind of train a new generation that can you imagine if we had a new generation that could talk peacefully and debate issues from different sides and not be so polarized and attack each other, and then maybe lay down some of the gun, just this culture and fascination with guns in this country. Maybe that's the stress response, right? Maybe that's an insecurity, an old kind of habitual pattern that if we train children from a younger age, maybe they can be okay with that and not feel like such a need to calm the aggression, calm that reptilian. It's almost like a reptilian brain response to me that we're not evolving past. Does that make sense? Or
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And if I may ask a follow-on, so one of the things that I thought was interesting, both in what I was observing when I was working in those areas, and what some of the things I heard you mention, was in terms of adapting techniques, like with micro meditations. I would like to see that paper. The little book, Sitting Still Like a Frog, had different techniques that were good for very young children. Working on the college campus, I was looking at how secular versus how traditional in terms of, serving a broader audience and things like that. So I guess my broad question is, will you have some knowledge of traditional techniques? And what do you see as the need for kind of looking for adapting those to meet the audience and the time and the place, especially when we're looking at different stages in developmental growth?
So I understand the question correctly. Are you saying, like, for a college student, what might be the most appropriate method or technique, or?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was a long rambling question. I'm just talking about, your thoughts on adapting from a very strict traditional technique.
Right.
We're going to sit and face the wall in a Zendo for 25 minutes and then a walking break and then again, versus, okay, a short, breathing exercise before class.
Right.
If you have any thoughts about ways to adapt to meet an audience and help them transition into it.
That's a tricky one, and I think it's still evolving. I would venture to say sitting against the wall for long periods of time is not going to fly with this generation, generation of college students, like I'm talking generally, right? Who are, on their phones and our attention spans are being pulled. I don't think those things are going to necessarily fly. I think it's going to have to be things where they start very gradually. But I think that's where you see like this proliferation of meditation apps like Calm and all of these things coming out. Because I think the best thing I've ever read or seen about that was, Daniel, Goleman of the multiple intelligence expert or guru, Daniel Goleman. He talked in one of his books, he talked about layers, for like different layers of rolling out meditation in kind of the mainstream. And the deepest layer was what you're saying, was people that like dive into full practice, right? And they learn the traditions. And then there's like people that might just practice a little meditation on their own. And so then it I guess waters down, and then it waters down to like maybe people practice with an app, right? Or they go on YouTube and they find something, or they just do a quick meditation on an app or Headspace. So there's almost like layers, and it obviously gets watered down like the further you get away from the practice. Like what you guys are doing in your practice is not you're going to be the same as somebody that's just following an app when they wake up in the morning in their dorm, So I think we have to layer it so that it suits different needs. There's going to be some college students that dive into it. There's going to be some that'll do it if it's in a group socially. There's going to be some that might just try an app, they might just do a minute or two in the morning. And that's probably the best you're going to get out of, that they're going to get out of it. So it's really hard. I don't think there's one or even a couple of different appropriate ways, to kind of match up to them. It's definitely challenging because of the, our addiction to technology. And I think our distracted age, that anything that's going to be longer or they're going to perceive as boring, it's going to be a turnoff to them.
Yeah, and Stephen, this is April on the side with COSETs. I do agree with that. In fact, we talked to Hojo Sensei just recently about that, how, as a Zen center, we can make practices and things available to folks. But I think you're exactly right with not really, you give it to folks in a way that they're receptive to it, but then as they grow in their own personal growth, they figure out if they want to get deeper into the practices. It's not that they may not even understand what they feel the benefit, but they don't really kind of deeper understand the what's happening. I mean, because when I first started practicing, like maybe 15 or 16 years ago, I just showed up because I was stressed out. I was, I needed something to really figure out how to work with my mind. And then as I progressed along the path, I started connecting into deeper levels, deeper, teachings, connecting with a teacher. So I feel like it's good to offer that like variety of places where people can connect in.
Right.
Because as people grow and evolve and develop, you never know what kind of settles in, and it helps them be able to connect. So again, we call those Dharma gates. What's a way or tool or resource that we can use to get people in to work with things that arise? Now, how they take it, or do they get it deep into it? That's the thing. And that's something a lot of the things you and I were talking about via email is mindfulness, the commercialism of it, versus, a practice, and do you ever get into danger taking the kind of foundational wisdom, the ethics away from that versus them getting some of the benefit of the mindfulness? Is that dangerous? And I'm asking that question to you, to Hojo Sensei and to Shinjin Sensei, kind of what their thoughts are related to that as well.
Well, I think I could talk about how I'm addressing it in this new mindfulness and learning course. I do think it's dangerous. Miles Neal, like in his writings, Dr. Neal talks about he had a great piece in 2011 called Mick Mindfulness and Frozen Yoga. And he talks about mindfulness without ethics and wisdom being empty, just not being enough. And you're stripping it from the other two, the like legs of a stool, right? And you're taking two legs out from under the stool. The way that I address it is I try to go back into the kind of the historical origins and foundation. And I also bring up wisdom later, though. First, I get them experience in mindfulness, and then I bring up traditional concepts of wisdom and ethics and how those play into mindfulness and say, like an example of a terrorist could be has to be mindful, right? A bank robber has to be mindful. We've all heard that example. Like you just focus and concentration in itself without values, without some kind of direction can be extremely harmful to society. So I just say an open conversation about ethics and values and wisdom, insight, and just bringing that to their attention and maybe introducing them to a couple of ways of embedding that or like bringing that into their practice. You can't ignore I think it's if someone brings in mindfulness and it's like a pop mindfulness and they're just saying, be mindful, be present, and they're not giving the whole, the contextual and historical framework or backgrounds, I think that's like a disservice to people. So that's just my opinion on it. You have to have the deeper discussions around that.
As I think we discussed, you and I discussed, Steve, I think, losing track a little bit, but we say in Zen, if you sit with your eyes closed, for one thing, how mindful can that be? Because you're cutting out more than 50% of the data flow. And then mindfulness of what is the question. And most people say, well, being in the moment, mindfulness of being in the moment. But in Zen, that's called the Zen sickness of falling into the moment, meaning it ignores past, future, present, karmic consequence over time. You think as long as I'm in the moment, everything is cool. Doesn't matter that I murdered my brother, last month or whatever. So just mindfulness alone, but we ask mindfulness of what? And the answer is pretty simple. It's mindfulness of Buddha's teachings. And mindfulness that what we're trying to accomplish here is to have a direct experience of Buddha's teachings, of Buddhism's teachings. The emptiness principle itself, the Four Noble Truths, on and on, go through the Dharma, the 12-fold chain, etc., which all build in ethics and cause and effect, causality. It's all there. So that's where mindfulness in Zen takes its place. It's not just ding-dong mindfulness of anything. It's more mindfulness of really what this life is about. And as you say, people come to Zen wanting to find out something about life. And we say there's a turning point where they realize that it's the other way around, really. Life is about what Zen is pointing at. The meaningfulness of Buddha's awakening was that the observer was included in the finding. And his place in existence became clear. And that's the problem with all the religious-driven warfare and all of that of the world. Its end goal is not simply to wake up spiritually. It's to dominate others, and it has all kinds of other goals. So we think Zen is different from science, different from religion, and it's pointing at reality. So that's our answer to the mindfulness question. It's not just being mindful of the moment or mindful in the moment. That makes sense.
Sensei, do you have anything else?
Really nothing else to add other than thank you very much for your talk. A lot of great information there.
John's hand was up.
Yeah. Who's up?
John Hinman.
Oh, John, whoops, sorry.
Thank you. Steve, or is it Dr. Haberlin?
You can just, Steve is fine.
Okay. Thank you so much. This was very informative, and for me personally, very exciting. My connection to your work started when I attempted locally in the community to start trying to impact the literacy rates. In our community, they get 3 years, first, second, and third, to learn to read. And once they hit the 4th grade, that's an assumption. You're reading, let's roll into the other subjects. And Steve, what happened with my particular movement is I realized there were important things that needed to be done before they start reading, before they start to learn to read. And it took me all the way back in terms of age, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, pre-zero. So this is the question. I'm particularly interested and excited about the work you did with the elementary school students. What do you know? What is your experience with working with parents and caregivers? I recently participated in a project where we rolled out some basic tools, puppets, support kinds of things for caregivers and parents to engage with these small minds. It's amazing what that mind has in terms of potential. And you touched on this from 0 to 3, 4, 5. You mentioned language, but it's a window that to a certain extent in my mind closes. So again, I'm just wondering, have you paid attention, had experience working with the parents of these children and the caregivers?
I can only speak to the parents that I've had in my classrooms when I was a K-12 teacher. So for like that study of the 28 students, I think there was one student that the parents declined that they participate, and they said for religious, I believe it's for religious reasons. They thought it was pushing Buddhism and whatnot. So I think you're going to always have a small amount of that in the population. There was, I'm trying to remember what year, but one of the counties here in Georgia, the school system was sued. A group of parents sued the school district when they were implementing, some schools were implementing yoga, and said that they were pushing Hinduism on the students, and it went against their religion. So I think you're always going to have some that are going to, they're going to not see it as secular and they're going to push back. I think that's a smaller percentage. And I think it seems like as mindfulness, as these things mainstream, the parents in general kind of mainstream with it, it becomes more accepted. When I was doing the study, I had the parents that said, yes, I want my child to participate, were super supportive and enthused. Some of them actually joined a little bit, wanted to learn some of the techniques. They were just super supportive. They felt like it was an emotional tool that their students were not getting through academics. Beyond that, I don't know. I think a good strategy, like if I were to tell a teacher, I think a good strategy would be like just generally to involve your students, involve your parents with anything you do anyway. So you could have like a parent night, right, where they come in and maybe they do a brief mindfulness meditation with their child. So I always tell my student teachers, you want to get them on your side, and you want them to support your classroom. So I would have them do the activities and understand some of the things that they're doing, so then they could do it with their kids. That said, John, there's always, I think, going to be a small faction that just is not going to buy what you're selling, but that shouldn't stop us from doing work that we think is important. That's just their choice for whatever reason to not participate, and that's their choice. So yeah, I don't think you can ever win them over 100%. I don't know if that answers your question, but that, I have a limited experience though, as far as I haven't tried to roll out anything major, and now we don't really deal with parents, as we deal directly with the college kids. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a few comments from off Facebook. And thank you for Diana Peterson and also David E. Doss for comments. But Diana says, I was a school psychologist in the 70s and early 80s. Meditation had been part of my life since my late teens. However, I didn't have exposure yet to Tonglen. I like what you are doing with that. My childhood and teens were religious-based and very protected in many ways. Getting into the real world of other people's pain was challenging. I tended not to go there during a session, but would have to think about it for later. Teaching students to stay with that and transform it as a presence is very valuable.
Lie down, go to bed, go to bed, go to bed, go to
Hey,
bed.
Shikaku, go on mute. And then we have a comment from David. Thank you for teaching this. This is a comment more than a question. Sometimes I feel like daydreaming is the thing in life I am best at. And the idea that rather than a way of distancing from reality, that it could be a way of better connecting to others. Experience is an inspiring thought. Gosh, I want to look further to Tonglen. So just wanted to read those comments from offline and see if you have any comments or questions.
Thank you for the comments. It stirred up something on Tonglen I didn't mention. One of the hesitations I have, like let's say just putting Tonglen into my classroom, in the beginning of class with the college students there, it's, it does get into taking in emotional pain of others, and it does go a little deeper. And I think if you have students that are fragile or has some trauma, right? So some small T trauma, or we have students here with major trauma, it's a delicate dance, it's really hard. I had one time where we did something where they kind of meditated on negative experiences, and we had a couple of students that really reacted very intensely. So it's one thing to do the breath meditation, but then it's another thing to roll out Tonglen and tell my students, like, yeah, we're gonna just imagine the pain of others or the pain of the world, the suffering of the world, take it in and transform it and give out relief. It's that's just been my hesitation. That's why this semester I didn't start to try to collect some qualitative data on it. I'm just a little hesitant to do it. I don't want to do it in a way that's irresponsible, or just like triggers. I don't want to just be a giant trigger for the class. So I don't know. I'm open to suggestions, but I think I'm just going to just kind of gradually. Maybe I started with a small group, that I have a closer connection with, and then try to roll it out. There hasn't. That said, there hasn't been done really relatively to all the research done on meditation. Tonglen is almost completely unlooked at and unexplored, which is interesting. Maybe that's why, because it's so emotionally sensitive, I don't know.
And Hoto Sensei.
Yeah, I think another reason is that it's like spooky action at a distance. It's kind of mystical and magical, and it assumes that somehow sending out good vibes, you're actually going to have a cause-effect relationship on something out there. And that kind of superstition or magical thinking, generally in Zen in particular, we try to avoid. You go back and look at the very early teachings, and of course they were written down 400 years after Buddha's death. They're just full of that kind of thing. That's why we recommend studying contemporaries and go back to Japan and go back to China and then finally back to India. So you can recognize what they're trying to say and sort of sift through the cultural accretions that are floating around there. The closest thing, I think, to Tonglen in the literature that we use in liturgy, for instance, is the Metta Sutta. It's a very brief little thing, but it's about what can be accomplished by the one who is wise, and it's sort of a social screed on how we should approach treating others. May all beings be happy is the main theme of it. But it does have a couple of references that you have to, if I'm remembering correctly, it may refer to Buddha, Bodhisattva. I don't think it does. I'm mixing it with Dogen's vow and some other things. But it's very free of jargon. And so I think, Steve, you and I can take this up offline and discuss it in a little more depth. I think it's a lot safer than Tonglen because of those connotations, because it does not have those.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you.
It's similar, Metta Sutta, Loving Kindness Sutra.
Right.
Can I piggyback on that?
Sure.
So just, again, something I've done with my teenager is used a metta meditation practice where, you know, you kind of expand your sphere of who you're thinking about and how challenging it is to deal with them. And I think that's a way to kind of ease into recognizing the pain and suffering of others rather than jumping straight into a dichotomy of us versus them with, you know, the situations that are more painful for you to think about, you know. So that's something that I think I would offer as an option. It worked with my teenager.
Yeah, it's a little more like expanding your embrace. It starts with yourself, then your family, and then moves out. And it's more like expanding your embrace than presuming that you have some magical power to, you know, send out there. And that could be dangerous.
The way we, yeah, and we had to address that in the book chapter. The way that we addressed that was, we said, you know, we're not making the claim that you're actually even having any cause and effect, any effect outside of yourself, but you're working on your own mental attitude, right? Your own awareness, which then could kind of influence or change your actions. So we were trying to say this is internal work, right? This is inner work, and we're not saying you're really actually changing that child or something that's oppressed in any sense of the word.
The same problem Islam has of jihad. Similar.
With that,
Two questions, quite different questions. One, because I tend not to, I work with people with disabilities, but I don't work with children, and we have tremendous issue with Georgia Tech's IRB. Did you have any IRB problems? Because dealing meditation in kids at Georgia Tech, the IRB would have just torn that apart. Just curious as to how you address that. And then I was personally interested in, if you're comfortable discussing what your own practices are, which I don't think I actually heard, and I would be quite fascinated in that.
Yeah.
Two questions.
Explain what IRB is. I don't
I'm
know.
sorry. Institutional Review Board. It's the ethics governing research at universities.
Oh.
Yeah, so anytime you're going to do research here or university, you have to submit basically like your plan, and then a review board, which is generally faculty, you know, they review it to make sure that's ethically sound and there's not going to create problems on the participants or subjects, as they would call. No, Paul, I didn't have any. It was hard explaining, like at USF, it's hard explaining a little bit about what you're doing. I didn't have any major problems with the dissertation, even prior to that with the school district, with the mindfulness and gifted students. I'm trying to remember back. There wasn't really any major pushback or concerns. I think they just generally said you need to have an out for people, you know, students or participants that are, you know, maybe uncomfortable with the meditation or not wanting to do it. But that would be the same for, you know, any kind of experiment, right, or any kind of research you're doing. If participants can drop out at any time. So I think if they just felt like, you want to give them that option anyway, they just felt like, hey, this is not for me, or this is you know, this is complicating things in my life, come talk to me, and then maybe I'm just going to not do this anymore. But I didn't have any major pushback. And maybe years ago, you know, maybe if I had submitted an IRB years ago, might have been different. I think that's getting maybe a little bit easier, but
Yeah, but your current work, that has an IRB, right?
yeah, I got to be careful. The door's open. There's nobody here today on campus.
Don't worry.
The IRB here, it's a very small group of faculty, and there's, you know, at a private college, there's not a lot of, how do I say this? There's not a lot of time for research, a lot of people doing that much research. So it's not as stringent as if you were like at UGA and I had to propose something. It probably would take like a month or 2 months, right, to go through the IRB process, right? But here it's a little bit easier, a little looser. So no, you know, and then you have relationships with these people too. So I think they trust, you know, that you're not going to do anything too crazy with the participants, right? Because you're at a small college, you got to live, you know, you're living in close quarters with everyone. As far as my personal practice, that's interesting. Yeah, I started with TM, which I still find really valuable. I think mantra meditation is, if if someone is really experiencing a lot of stress or anxiety and things like that, mantra meditation is very interesting. So I still try to keep that. I tried to look at it as like a toolbox. As I got to the point though, after doing TM for so many years, I needed to learn something else. Like when I did my dissertation, I joined a Zen group in Tampa, and I learned Zazen. And then I still do these trainings online, like with Miles Neal. I worked with Naropa University and learned some mindfulness. Like I don't know, I guess it's just like an expanding toolbox. I think if the way I look at it is the mind has a lot of potential. And so you want to have varying techniques that can kind of tap different things or develop different things. Some techniques like you need at the moment, and that's something you're going through. For example, maybe like a loving kindness meditation, if you're not feeling that connected to others or feeling that loving at work or something. But then there's other times where you might need more of a stress reduction tool or something to kind of open your mind, clear the mind. So I think for me, it's been gathering tools. So I just use a combination. As far as schedule, I meditate every morning, probably if I had 40 minutes, I would do it, but I usually wake up early, and I'd say about 30 minutes in the morning. And it could be a combination of practices, but it's always around just sitting with the breath. That's like the foundation. And then I'll usually work off of things off of that. And then I try to do a short one in the evening, probably like, even if it's just 15 minutes or 10 minutes, just to like reorient myself, just to try to bring myself back to like, what's the goal, and come back to that. So I think it's kind of evolved just, like not a hybrid, but like a myriad of practices have just kind of gelled for me, and I use those. I find sometimes, I don't know if you find, like sometimes things work for a while and then they don't seem to work, and you kind of put them aside, or maybe not throw them out, but you shelf them, and then something else works for a while, and then it seems like, I don't know, it seems like it doesn't work so much, and then you come back. So I think it was he's quite a controversial character, but Shengyang Rinpoche from Trungpa, who started Naropa University. He was a Tibetan monk that died early in his 50s from alcoholism, but he said something to the effect of like, use techniques as they work, but don't be too attached to a technique. Don't be too attached to a certain way, because then it actually can stop working, have an adverse effect. So you kind of like hold on to techniques gently, and then, I don't know if that makes sense. I like to see it more as like a fluidity. So does that give you enough of a description of how I practice?
Yes. Thank you very much. You answered the question really. It generates follow-on questions about, for instance, the role of teachers, which differs by different discipline, right?
Mhm.
Which is a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for sharing your experience with me.
Corolla had her hand up. Corolla.
Ijun, Corolla, I saw your hand.
Hello. That's a very interesting talk. And I recently retired from running physics lab. I was a physics lab coordinator, and I supervised the graduate students that were teaching. And at any given time, a significant number of my grad students were either Theravada Buddhists, or at least Buddhist friendly, or at least not Christian. And I found that this really helped our interactions with the students. We could, if someone came to me with a problem with the student, we could sit down and mindfully talk about what the student's problem was and how best to help. And it was very useful. However, at our university, there are very strict rules about discussing religion with students. We can answer questions, but we can't push anything. And here in the Deep South, Buddhism is seen very much as the spawn of Satan. So my question is, how can you sort of sneak this into public schools, not to indoctrinate people, but to use this as a secular tool when there is so much resistance, especially these days with the evangelicals versus the world sort of mindset that we have? I was the only probably lab at Georgia State that actually had the Metta Sutta taped to the wall for people to read as they were going to teach their labs. And it was extraordinarily helpful, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really important question. I think that that struggle will continue to go on. I don't think that's going to ever completely go away, but I mean, I think that just my predecessors, people that have come way before me, and people that have laid all the groundwork, like John Kabat-Zinn, who's done the mindfulness, created mindfulness-based stress reduction program all the way back from the 70s, has pushed it as a secular practice, that taking mindfulness techniques and applying it to, say, like chronic pain does not require beliefs in the Buddha or chanting or anything like that. And he built that program even all the way back for like Maharishi back in the 60s with TM. He promoted, it was promoted as a technique, like brushing your teeth in the morning. You're just repeating a sound, and it's a cause and effect. And you don't have to believe in, Hindu gods or practice anything else. You don't even have to go to their organization. You can do it at home. So it's a technique, and it's promoted as a technique. Now, there's always been criticism, pushback of that. Oh, you're right. Exactly what you said. You're sneaking in Hinduism. You're sneaking in Buddhism when you teach mindfulness. The way that I think it has to be done is, like, in my mind, I could just speak from my experience in the mindfulness learning class there. We just, when Sensei Ellison came in this week, we were just talking about the roots of mindfulness, and I showed them, I gave them a quick story of the Buddha. We went into the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path, and I said, I always preface it with, I'm not even a Buddhist myself. I'm not trying to make you a Buddhist. This is like me in a religious class talking about the history of, say, Jesus Christ as a person, historically, what we know about him. I said, I'm not trying to push or promote anything, but I said, if you're going to practice these techniques in this class, you need a healthy respect of where this stuff comes from. You can't talk about lasagna without saying it came, maybe it's Italian cuisine and where Italy is, you know what I mean? It doesn't make, I have to tell you to go there and start, speaking Italian. But you really need to know where this stuff comes from. I said, you can't culturally appreciate anything without tracing it back and reading and studying about it and talking about it. Now, that said, that's it. You can take it as far as you want to go. But I always tell them, I'm not pushing any religious concepts on you. I'm not pushing you to believe anything. I'm pushing you as take a technique and use it as a first person experience, first person inquiry. See if it works for your life, see if it helps your school, your personal life. And if it doesn't, don't do it, drop it. So yeah, but that said, I don't think we'll ever completely eliminate the criticism that we're sneaking in, that we're it's like it's a Trojan horse, that we're Trojan horsing in this as a disguise for religion, for Buddhism. But I don't know. I'm not going to fight. I think you have to pick your battles too.
Was that helpful? Any other comments?
Yes, that is helpful. You're more optimistic than I am, because we still have wars down here over the fact that we don't force kids to pray in school. And so we're always going to have people that say, oh, nobody's praying, so how can we do this other religious stuff? And
right.
So I think that's going to be a struggle forever, but
yep.
Let's be optimistic. But you have to remember, I live in Cobb County, the home of the evolution is only a theory stickers. So we may be a little bit more backward than some of the rest of the world.
Yeah. Based on their religious belief and viewpoint, I think you're going to have a stronger resistance, depending on where they're coming from religious wise. Yeah.
Thank you. Hojo Sensei.
Yeah, that's very much in line with our lineage and legacy and how we're approaching propagation of Zen. We don't see it as a religion competing with other religions at all. I come from a creative background, design and art. And Randy and I are going to be working on a book called Around the Intersection of Design Thinking and Zen. It's more methodology. It's more what works, as you're saying. And I like to make the point that Buddha was not a Buddhist, any more than Christ was a Christian. And what he did and the movement he started and the way it grew, that's now what we call Buddhism, but it's not an ism in the sense of theism. And so it doesn't have a competition with theistic religions. I think it could become your religion in a sort of deep philosophical sense, but that's the only way in which it qualifies as a religious worldview. So that's the dilemma we face. There's nothing wrong with Zen. You couldn't have a better brand to work with, and it's how we present it. And so our focus is entirely on the presentation. When you get the book, The Original Frontier, you'll see I base it on Matsuoka Roshi's teaching, at least a pamphlet that he handed out at the Zen Center. Very free of jargon, very free of religious ideas. And that's what I mean by we're transmitting a legacy where he saw Zen as being dead in Japan. And you could say it's dead in China and dead all over the world, really, wherever countries of origin. But the way it is surviving at all, if at all, in those countries is more along the lines of the monastic model. We just don't think that's the model for the future here in America, although a lot of lineages seem to think it is. And we follow monastic practices on retreat, but we don't see ourselves as monks. We're householders. So that's the direction we're going, and it sounds like the same direction you're going. And I think it's finding the language to express it. So I tend to use words like natural. It's the natural posture. It's the natural breath. The way people used to sit around the campfire, the way so forth. The natural state of mind. Regressing to an original state of mind as you had as a child, 2 or 3 years old. It's nothing more than that, but the implications are vast. The implications are vast and deep. And if followers of theism practiced meditation more, I think they would have insights that would allow them to couch their preaching in more, ecumenical terms than they do. What we resent about religion is when people try to impose their religion on us, So Zen just doesn't want to go there.
Yep, and I know we are at the noon hour, so I want to just allow Stephen, any final comments?
No, I really appreciate it. I just enjoyed this talk. The questions were really insightful, really deep. It makes me think and try to clarify kind of my thoughts and my mission. But no, I would just say, when I tried to put this PowerPoint together, I said, well, what I tried to do is take something that helped me, like something that's the core of me or my being, and try to infuse that into my work and try to help others. And I would just say whatever line of work, and it sounds like a lot of different lines of work, whatever your work is, your line of work or your life's path, try to infuse some of these tools and some of these approaches that are really helpful, right? And it can benefit others. And just try to creatively find ways to embed it, because then maybe we're, through our different fields and through our different paths, we're having an impact, we're helping others, and with this very much needed meditative type, movement.
I was thinking Keiko might have something to say about the traditional coming from Japan, and you can see what struggle we're going through here and trying to not quite Americanize it, but adapt it to the culture that we live in. Yeah, coming from Japan, the country of origin, you might have a different perspective.
I was thinking, back at the time, Matsuoka Roshi decided to come and teach here. He was seeing aspects of that.
It was pre-war, 1939.
Yes. but in my thought right now in Japan, that I think there is an underlying need, pretty desperate need, and there is a lot of activities going on within the Japanese. Not only Zen, Soto Zen, but many priests are trying to reach out in different forms and different ways, and I think people are also seeking. So it's not to be a monk in a monastery, but in a lay people community. I think, that there's things happening in Japan as well, and so it's kind of like even something Makoto Roshi did, jumping outside of Japan, would be feeding back to Japan too.
Yeah.
And that is very, very interesting.
When we went there in '87, not '87, but 2015, a lot of the monastics told us that just the fact that 7 of us came back to trace his footsteps, it shows that it's very inspiring to them.
He even reminds me of Rogan. He traveling to China, bringing it back to Japan. So it's happening.
Well, again, Stephen, thank you so much for bringing your wisdom, your knowledge, your work. It will be very interesting after you get through with the next paper to come back and share that information with us maybe sometimes next year. And as always, we're so grateful to have different points of view, discussion, because it pushes us in our own personal practice, whether you're Zen, whether you're Tibetan, Christian, all over. So again, it really gets us all to the place to where we can have some clarity in our own practice. So again, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Sure, you're welcome.